All right, so we are essentially at the first line of Kuf Hey Amen Aleph, 105a. However, we're just going to review the Brisa at the bottom of Kuf Dalet Amen Beis 104b, which really is the basis for the question on Ula. In Abaya visiting Ula, he saw that when he said the bracha for Havdalah, he said, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. That was it that he had said. So the Gemara asks, wait, the Brisa says that generally the halacha is that a bracha will begin with Baruch and end with a Baruch. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, and then say the bracha, and then conclude with, again, Baruch Atah Hashem, and conclude the bracha. Like we have, let's say, the first bracha, the Amida. It starts with Baruch Atah Hashem, says the bracha, and then it says Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham. So we have a full bracha, start and end. That's the classic bracha. However, there are some brachas that either don't have the end part, just starts with Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam and a phrase, and then it ends with just the content of the bracha without repeating Baruch Atah Hashem again at the end. And there are brachas that only have a Baruch Atah Hashem at the end. And as the Brisa explained, that when there's a bracha that's connected to a previous bracha, it means it comes immediately following, like all the rest of the brachas in the Amida, where the second bracha and on all start with just some words. Ata, Chonein, Salach Lanu, Rafa'enu, Modim, right? They all start with just a word that doesn't start with Baruch Atah Hashem because they're connected to previous bracha. As well as some brachas are short and therefore they don't have a conclusion. And even the last bracha of the of Birkas Hamazon of what's called the bracha of Atov Meitiv, even though it's very long, it's really one constant phrase, one constant concept straight through, so it doesn't end with Baruch Atah Hashem. In any case, since we say generally the brachas require a psicha of a baruch, an opening of baruch, and a chasima, a baruch, a conclusion of a baruch, this bracha that he said, that Ula had said, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol, period, that is not sufficient. It didn't end with anything. So kasha, so we start at Kuf Hey Amen Aleph at the top, 105. A kasha le'ula. So this Brisa is now a contradiction to Ula because Ula had said just the phrase without conclusion of Baruch Atah Hashem. So the Gemara says, actually, Amalacha Ula would respond to you, Hanami keberchas hamitzvahs nami. Part of what the brachas of a mitzvah, you only say the bracha and that's it. For instance, as we said, taking the lulav. We say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvos v'tzivanu al netilas lulav. Period. Similar, we're going to have in a few weeks. We're going to have the brachas of the seder matzah. You say al achilas matzah, and that's it, and we're done. So there's no conclusion. You say the opening, and that's it. So too, the Havdalah is going to be similar to that. Hanami keberchas mitzvahs dami. Berchas and mitzvahs my time. So Gemara says, why? What is the reason that when you make a bracha for the mitzvah, you do not have a conclusion? It's just a short bracha, like you do for food. My time, it's a bracha of thanks, of praise, of thanksgiving. Like you say, Borei Peri Ha'etz, you are the creator of the fruit of the tree. So that's a short bracha. So too, for the brachas of pleasure of Nanan, so too, for mitzvahs, also we're going to have just a short bracha, and not no conclusion. So this Havdalah is also giving praise and thanks for what we have, and that's why it doesn't have a conclusion, only has an opening. And so this is the answer to the question on Ula, and we now are on the third line of 105a, Kuf Hey Amen Aleph. Rav Chananya bar Shalamya, v'tamidei Rav, havi yaseh b'sudasa. Rav Chananya and the students of Rav were sitting at a meal. V'koyalai Rav Amnuna Saba, and in this case, Rav Amnuna Saba was serving them. This is a fascinating thing. We keep on seeing that the elders, the Chachamim, would be serving some of the guests that were students. So Amrulei, they said to him, Zil Chazi Imikdash. Go see if the day has already been sanctified. Meaning they were at a meal on Friday. And as we've seen earlier, somebody's on a meal on Friday, once Shabbos comes, they have to stop because you're obligated in Kiddush, so you're not allowed to eat anymore. And since you're obligated in Kiddush, you have to stop the meal and sanctify Shabbos. You have to make Kiddush, and then you bring the meal, the Puris Mappa, you cover, and you bring the meal for Shabbos. So they said to him, go check if the sun is set and we're going to need to stop for Shabbos. Nafsik, so we will stop. V'nikbe eila Shabbos, and we'll establish it as Shabbos. Meaning, they indicated that they would have to say or do something in order to make it Shabbos. Amar lehu leitzrichisa. He said, no, you don't have to do that. Shabsa kavala nafsha. Shabbos establishes itself. I mean, you can accept Shabbos early, and then it would be fine. But you cannot. But once Shabbos comes, you don't have to establish Shabbos. Once the sun is set, that Shabbos, regardless if you said anything for it or not. And so he said to them, I could check if the sun is set, but if the sun is set, you don't have to establish Shabbos. All you have to do is cover the table, make Kiddush, and then uncover the table. Dama Rav, as Rav said, Kashem Shabbos Kavas LaMaser. Just as Shabbos establishes for Maser, so Kach Shabbos Kavas LaKiddush, so too it sets itself for Kiddush. Now, what does it mean that Shabbos sets itself, establishes for the tithe? The halacha is, when somebody harvests, that they have to tithe the food, and until they tithe the food, they're not allowed to eat it. However, there's a halacha that they can eat a little bit if they're not actually sitting down. They're just sort of snacking on it, like a noshing on whatever it is that they're bringing in. So let's say they're harvesting grapes. They can pick a grape and put it in their mouth. Obviously, they'd say a bracha, but even though they didn't tithe it yet, that's allowed to be done. It's called achilas aray, a casual, non-established, non-set eating of that food. However, you can't do that on Shabbos because Shabbos itself is so important. Shabbos itself is of such importance, or it's so valuable, if you would, that it sets whatever you're eating as a pleasure, because halacha is that Shabbos is v'karatz l'Shabbos on it. You call it a pleasure. So if you're doing something as a delight, as a pleasure for Shabbos, even though that it's in passing, you're just nashing, that makes it a set, a set enough achila of eating that you would have to, have tithed this in order to eat it. You can't just eat it in passing as a snack, because Shabbos it sets it as a proper meal. So too, Shabbos sets its time for Kiddush. Once Shabbos sets in, the sun set, you're obligated in Kiddush. And the idea is that in both of these cases, you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat the tithe because the produce, because it requires tithing, meaning that Shabbos sets it that it's prohibited to be eaten. So to over here, you're not allowed to continue the meal. Shabbos sets it so that there's that it becomes a new session of eating, and you're not allowed to eat. You have to do that. And as Tosfos points out, even if you started eating the tithe, you were snacking before Shabbos came in. But nevertheless, when Shabbos comes, you have to stop. Okay, so that's this idea that Shabbos sets itself, and as soon as Shabbos comes in, you are obligated in Kiddush, and you may no longer eat. So the Gemara says, Savar Mina. So they thought that they can make, by comparison, extend that one more step as well. And that Kihechidel Kiddush, just as when the sun sets, Shabbos sets the prohibition of eating, and that you're not allowed to continue eating and you have to stop. And you're automatically, Shabbos is sanctified, and you are obligated to say the Kiddush over a glass of wine. So the Gemara says, so too kach kaval Havdalah. So they thought that the same would be for Havdalah if somebody's having a meal and is eating Suda Shlishis, the third meal of Shabbos, and it's extended into when the 3 stars come out. Shabbos is over. Now, that sets itself as the end of Shabbos, and you're not allowed to continue eating because you're obligated in Havdalah, and you'd have to make Havdalah. Amalahu Rav Amram. So Rav Amram said, Rav, this is what Rav said. L'kiddush kovas. At the entrance of Shabbos, where you're bringing in Shabbos, it will establish it and set the time, or set the prohibition of eating, because now it's already Shabbos. Shabbos is automatically set at the time that the sun sets. You have to accept it upon yourself, whether you verbally do so or not. It is Shabbos, so you can't continue eating. You have to stop. You have to make Kiddush, and then you can continue your meal. However, that's only at the entrance of Shabbos. V'loy Havdalah kavas, but it doesn't set it for a Havdalah, because you can continue eating if you started the meal. So the Gemara explains, V'hani mili le'ini mifsik. That means in regards to the manner of stopping, you don't have to stop your meal. Mifsik nami le'amra delay mafsakina, that you don't have to stop. However, aval aschuli le'maschalina, but you cannot start a new meal after Shabbos is already ended until you make Havdalah. So this idea that Shabbos doesn't force you to end the meal short, it doesn't split the meal, meaning the end of Shabbos. You started your meal before the end of Shabbos, you can continue on, and you don't have to stop for Havdalah. So Suda Shlishis doesn't have to stop, and when the stars come out, you can continue eating. However, but you're not allowed to start once you're obligated in Havdalah. You can no longer start your meal. And the Gemara continues. It says, "Umifsek nami," and this that we said, that you don't have to stop. Lo amran ela ba'achila. If you had been eating a meal, so you washed and you had hamotzi for Suda Shlisha, so you don't have to, then you're allowed to continue. Aval b'shtia, but if you had a wine, even though that wine does count as a set meal, as it were, but it would not continue once Shabbos is over. You have to stop drinking. You have to make Havdalah. But that's only with wine and beer, and the halacha is really even in other drinks as well. Aval maya lesam. But with water, there's no problem. If somebody needs to drink and Shabbos is over already, and they need to have a drink in order to have Havdalah, and they're not ready for Havdalah, so they can have a little bit to drink before Havdalah. Whereas for Kiddush, you're not allowed to drink or eat before Kiddush. By Havdalah, you're allowed to have a drink of water, but not other drinks. Pliga de Rav Huna. And this disagrees with Rav Huna. The Rav Huna, Rav Huna saw somebody that was drinking water prior to Havdalah after Shabbos was out. You're not afraid of this ailment askara, which comes as a punishment for someone who eats or drinks before Havdalah, which is that you couldn't couldn't hold out for Havdalah, and therefore this punishment of I think it's diphtheria, whatever it is, but it's something that causes a type of choking. The Tana Meshmeidu Rabbi Akiva, because it was taught in the name of Rabbi Akiva, anybody that tastes anything, meaning eats anything prior to Havdalah, misasa ba'askara. The punishment is askara. However, Rabbanan Devei Ravashi lekapti amai. The Chachamim of the Academy of Ravashi were not strict about drinking water, like this previous halacha said, that water is allowed to be had prior to Havdalah. Ravina asked Rav Nachman Yitzchak, Mishalei Kiddush be'erev Shabbos. Somebody missed Kiddush Friday night. Can he make Kiddush the rest of the day? So he missed Kiddush Friday night. Shabbos morning wakes up and says, oh my goodness, I forgot to make Kiddush last night. Or he fell asleep and simply didn't have a meal at night. Can he make Kiddush in the morning? since the Academy of Rabbi Chia, the sons of Rabbi Chia said that somebody had forgotten to make Havdalah Friday night, Motzei Shabbos. Right after Shabbos, they forgot to say Havdalah. They didn't make Havdalah, whatever it was. Sunday morning, can they make Havdalah? Yes. In fact, they could even do it up until the end of Tuesday. So since they can make Havdalah and continue Hachanami, Mishali Kiddush Berev Shabbos, Mekadosh V'Hilch Kol Kulei, so they can make Kiddush all of Shabbos. If somebody missed Kiddush Friday night, they can make it in the morning or even in Shabbos afternoon. Esave. So we ask a brisa that seems to say that Kiddush is only Friday night, because the brisa says, Leilei Shabbos v'leilei Yontev yesh behem kedusha. The nights of Shabbos, meaning Friday night, and the night of Yontev, meaning the eve of Yontev, yesh behem kedusha. There's a sanctification, a holiness, ala kais, and you have to say that Kiddush, you would say it on a cup of wine. V'yesh ba'askara b'mechas hamazon, and you have to mention the in benching after the meal, either Shabbos or both, whichever one is that day. So for Shabbos, you're going to say Ritzei. On Yontif, we say Ya'alav Yavam, but it has to be mentioned. So you make Kiddush at the beginning of the meal, and you say Birkas Hamazon, an inclusion of Birkas Hamazon at the end of the meal. However, Shabbos v'Yontiv, the day of Shabbos or the day of Yontiv, ein behem Kiddush alakais. You do not say Kiddush on a cup. V'yesh behen askara Birkas Hamazon, but you do say Kiddush. You do mention it in Shabbos and Yontif. So you're going to mention it in the Shabbos. So you're going to mention the Yontif in the Birkas Hamazon and benching, but you're not going to say Kiddush like we do Friday night. Now, even though you know that we say Kiddush Shabbos morning, but the Kiddush is a simple Kiddush called, it's just Borei Pri Hagafen, right? That's really the essence of the Kiddush by day. Friday night is a separate bracha. Yontif night is a separate bracha. By Shabbos, there's no bracha. I mean, we say customarily, we say some verses, we say some psukim from the Torah that mention Shabbos, but really the Kiddush for Shabbos day is simply a cup of wine, and you say Borei Pri Hagafen. Now, the Isaac at Hetchem Mishali Kiddush Berev Shabbos Mekadosh V'Hilch Kol Yom Kulei. But if you are correct that you Kol Yom Kulei, that if you miss Kiddush Friday night, that you still make Kiddush Shabbos day. So why did this brisa say that there's no Kiddush Shabbos day? There is in a certain scenario. If you forgot Kiddush Friday night, you're going to say it Shabbos day. Same for Yontif. So if so, Shabbos Yontif Nami Mishkachasu. The Yesh Ben Kiddush Alakos. So we find a scenario with this Kiddush even on Shabbos day and Yontif day. The Gemara says no. The Ilay Kiddush or to Mekadosh Macha. Oh, so the Gemara says, and in this scenario, if you forgot Kiddush at night, you get to say it the next day. Omar late, to which the Gemara said no. That's not a good question. The Katani, the Bryce is not talking about if you forgot in a scenario that's unique. The simple setup, what the proper setup is, Friday night and Shabbos and Yontif at night. There's a Kiddush. Where there's a special bracha for the sanctification of the day, for the kiddush of the day, and on Yontif day and Shabbos day, there isn't. The kiddush we say is simply Borei Pri Hagafen. So we ask a question. Essentially, what we've just learned is that the sanctification of Shabbos is Friday night, and Shabbos day is a lesser sanctification. When we have a brisa that says, if somebody has a specialty that they can have on Shabbos, it is better to have it by day over at night. The honor of Shabbos day, of Yontif day, is greater than the honor of at night. So Kvod Yom is better. The honor of the day is better. Meaning, if you had a nice bottle of wine, don't use it for Kiddush Friday night. If it's only one bottle, it's only going to be sufficient for the day. Use it for the day meal to bring a greater honor to the day meal. the im ein lo ela kaisechad. However, if somebody only has one cup of wine, now, the day, you're right. You think that the honor of the day is first. Omer alav kiddush hayom. There, the Brisa says he's going to say the Kiddush Friday night, not the Kiddush by day. Because the Kiddush that you say at night on the cup of wine is greater than the honor of the day. So even though if I only had one cup of wine, one bottle of wine, we said, oh, leave that for the day meal because in order to give the greater honor to the Shabbos day meal. But if you only had one cup of wine, and so you'd only be able to make one Kiddush, make the Kiddush Friday night on that one glass of wine. Because the sanctification of the day, which is the Kiddush that you say, is going to come before the honor of the day. So Gemara says, why make that distinction? If you are right that if I forget Kiddush Friday night, I can make Kiddush by day, well then just put the two together. Don't make any Kiddush Friday night. Leave one glass of wine you have for Kiddush by day, which means that a part of your meal you're going to have some wine. And this way you get both of these concepts. The concept of honoring the Shabbos day, which is greater, as well as the honor of Kiddush on a glass of wine. And so, voila, you put the two together and you have a way of doing it correctly. So Gemara says, no, a greater importance is to do a mitzvah in its proper time. Chaviva mitzvah b'shata. A mitzvah that you do in its proper time is precious. It's very precious, and that comes first. And we learn this actually from something we saw earlier, where the halacha is that when a korban, an animal, was brought in the Beis HaMikdash, a korban, so it was brought close. So there were parts that would go on the altar, on the mizbeach. Now, those parts are brought even on Shabbos. Even though that if I waited a bit, and it's kosher to bring it through the night, so I could just wait until after Shabbos and put it on the fire on the altar, on the mizbeach, after Shabbos, and I would save, as it were, the transgression of the breaking of Shabbos and putting the parts that go on the mizbeach onto mizbeach on Shabbos. I could do it after Shabbos, and it's kosher. Nevertheless, we do it on Shabbos because chaviva mitzvah b'shata. And this is learned from Oilach Shabbos b'Shabbatoi, the ascent offering, which all goes on the mizbeach, is done on Shabbos, and it's because that's the time. Even though it's kosher if I wait, nevertheless, a mitzvah in its proper time, even if it means that you're going to be doing something that technically or generally would be prohibited on Shabbos, still do it on Shabbos because that's the proper time, and a mitzvah in its proper time is precious. So too over here, the Kiddush, yes, if you left the Kiddush for the day, you would have a day meal, which is you should leave the best for the day meal. And you can have Kiddush also, so you can have it all at once. But nevertheless, you'd be missing out on Kiddush in the proper time, which is at the onset of Shabbos, at the beginning of Shabbos. You bring in Kiddush with your Shabbos, with the sanctification, with the Kiddush right as Shabbos comes in, as early as you can. And we generally don't postpone Kiddush. We don't wait too long for Kiddush. We do it as soon as Shabbos comes in because that is the beauty. That's the greatest honor, to do mitzvah in its proper time. So the Gemara challenges, says, is this really a rule that you do a mitzvah in its proper time? But and that's a preciousness in a mitzvah to do it in its proper time. But how do we learn? Somebody comes home, Matzah Shabbos, after Shabbos, and he makes Havdalah. Normally we would make Havdalah. What is Havdalah? You would say the four brachas of a Havdalah on wine in this order, because it's the opinion of Beis Shammai. It says on the candle and the basabim, and then on the spices. We do the other way around, spices and then candle, and then a Havdalah on cup of wine, which you say Hamavda Bekodesh Chol. Now, v'im ein lo ela kosech. Now, this person only has one cup of wine, and as Tosfos explained earlier, and we saw earlier, he only has one cup. And as we'll see as soon in the Gemara, and we mentioned multiple times now, that really the halacha is that when you say Birkas Hamazon, when you bench, you should do so on a cup of wine. So this fella comes home and he's going to need to eat dinner, and he's going to wash, and he's going to have to bench, and he's going to have to say it on a cup of wine, but he only has one cup of wine. Now, even though you're not supposed to eat before Havdalah, but because he only has one cup of wine and he needs to eat, and he's going to have to say benching on a cup of wine, so he also can eat now and postpone Havdalah until after eating. And then when he benches, he's going to say on the one cup, he's going to say Havdalah and benching. Now, even though we saw earlier, the Gemara said, wait, you're not supposed to do two mitzvahs on one cup. I mean, you don't do mitzvahs chavilas, bundling mitzvahs together, because that's not it's not an honor to the mitzvah to bundle it that way. But nevertheless, because he only has one cup, what's he supposed to do? In that case, he's allowed to bundle it together, because it doesn't look like he's doing it as out of a lack of respect to the mitzvah. It's simply because he doesn't have another way of doing it right now. Fine. So he's going to bundle them together, and he's going to say Havdalah and benching on the same. But wait, we have another problem here. Chaviva mitzvah b'shata. We just said that a mitzvah in its proper time is precious, and he's going against that. He's postponing the mitzvah. So he responded and he said, Amar le, he said to him, Hana lechakimana, I'm not so wise. I didn't say this halacha by myself, that chaviva mitzvah b'shata, that you have to do a mitzvah in its time, and that's precious, and that's the correct way of doing it. I'm not a visionary. I'm not someone who tells you the future, right? So I'm not a prophet. I'm also not an individual. I'm not telling you an opinion of a single opinion. I'm telling you the majority opinion, the halacha. I'm telling you an organized and accepted halacha. Chaviva mitzvah b'shata. This is the way it was taught in the academy. This is the way I learned it from my teachers, and I repeated it and checked it, and it's true. This is the halacha. Chaviva mitzvah b'shata. A mitzvah in its time is precious, and therefore that supersedes other calculations of when and how to do the mitzvah. And that is the way it is ruled in a base medrash. Now, what's the basis? What's the reasoning for this? The Gemara says, there's a distinction between bringing in Shabbos and letting Shabbos go. Bringing in Shabbos, no excuses. As soon as you can do that, sanctifying Shabbos at the beginning, got to do it right away. Doesn't make a difference what other calculations you have. As soon as you have the opportunity to say Kiddush, you got to do it. However, Matzah Shabbos, where you're letting Shabbos go, really, Shabbos is so precious, we don't want to let it go. We want to hold on to it. So if you have some reason, some need to extend Shabbos, not say Havdalah yet, in order to have the meal so that he can have a cup of wine on benching, so then indeed we would postpone Shabbos. Bringing Shabbos in, the earlier the better. And that is a preciousness. However, at the end of Shabbos, when Shabbos is leaving, that's a good thing to let it go a little later and extend it. So it doesn't look like Shabbos is a burden. Rather, in fact, we'd rather keep Shabbos going longer, and that too is a part of the mitzvah. In any case, the Gemara is going to say we're going to learn a host of halachas from this. Shemami na mihamasnita, from this brisa we learn tamanya, 8 different halachas. Shemami na hamavda betfila tzarich sheyavdel alakos. One halacha we learn is that even though in the Ma'ariv service, in the evening service of Motzei Shabbos, in the fourth bracha, we insert a special havdalah. We say the fourth bracha, you give wisdom and understanding to a person. And then we insert, you have taught us to with graciousness to know your Torah and your laws and separate from good and bad, etc. Right? So we say the Havdalah insertion in the fourth bracha of the Amidah on Matzah Shabbos and Matzah Yantiv. Yet, even though you did that, when you still should make Havdalah on a cup of wine as well. Even though you did one, you're going to make a separate Havdalah on a cup of wine like we normally do Havdalah. Ushmamina, and another halacha, and we saw that from the fact that this person comes home and it says that he's going to make Havdalah on a cup of wine. Now, coming home from where? Assuming from shul, and he's already had the Amidah, and said Ma'ariv, and he said Havdalah like he's supposed to say in the Amidah, and yet he's coming home and making Havdalah again. Also, Shmamina, bracha to unakos, that in general, when you say the benching, the end of a meal, you're supposed to say it on a cup of wine. Martosis here, and there's an extensive discussion in halacha. Is that true in general, even if you're benching for yourself? Only if you're benching with three or more, where you have a zimun, where there's the halacha of zimun of an invitation to bench, and one really says the benching for everyone, and everybody says it along silently with in an undertone with the mavarich. That's the halacha of zimun, or only in 10, which is opinion of Rambam, whatever it may be. But we learn over here that there was, in this scenario, there was an obligation to say the benching on a cup of wine that he was going to hold off on Havdalah on account of. So you see, that's an obligation, an important one. And not only that, you need to have a requisite amount. Now we understand for Havdalah, you're going to have a revius of wine, which is let's say 3 ounces. Okay, so you're going to have a revius of wine. Why don't you just make Havdalah, drink a little bit, and then you still have a cup of wine, and you'll say the benching on that. From the fact that you can't do that, we see that this person has just 1 cup of wine, and therefore he can't drink any, because if he does, he's not going to have enough left for Havdalah, for benching. You see that even the benching a cup of wine needs that requisite, that minimum amount. And also, so why don't you just make Havdalah? And if he made Havdalah, he'll leave the cup of wine there and have his meal. And when he benches, he'll go back to that. The fact that he didn't do that is an indication that not only does he have to have the requisite amount, but for the Havdalah that he's going to make, he has to actually sip some. And so he has to taste some of it. That's going to be a problem. Ushmamina ta'amid pagma. And there's another concept of pagam, that it was not uncommon for multiple people to drink out of 1 cup of wine, or 1 cup. However, for bracha, there's a certain disgust in drinking from the same cup, and therefore, ta'amai, once one person tasted from it, pagmai, it made the wine in there invalid, that you can no longer use it as is for another bracha. So this way, even if he sipped from it, he's not going to be able to make a bracha use this for benching, and so therefore it's invalidated. Ushmamina ta'am mavdil. And another thing we've learned before, that you're not supposed to eat and even drink. You're not supposed to drink before Havdalah. And we saw 2 opinions, whether you're allowed to have water. And as we mentioned, the halacha is that you're allowed to have water before Havdalah, but you're not allowed to eat. And here, this fellow is coming home. And because he doesn't have an opportunity to have both a cup for Havdalah and a cup of wine for the meal, he's going to end up having the meal prior to Havdalah. Now, why don't we say, look, you ruined it. You had a meal, you ate before Havdalah. You can't make Havdalah anymore. You have to wait till the next morning where you haven't had any food yet, and then you're going to make Havdalah. We don't say that. Ta'am, even though you ate, you're allowed to make Havdalah. Ushmamina, and now we're on Kuf Vav Amid Aleph, 106a at the top. Ushmamina amr beis kedushas al kasechat. And we also learned that you're allowed to do two separate mitzvahs on one cup, because over here he's going to say benching and havdalah on one cup. Now, even though we explained the only reason he's allowed to do this is because he doesn't have another cup, but still, even in such a scenario, that's a chiddush. That is some new idea that when you don't have an option, you can do both on one cup, and we don't say, look, choose one. We say, no, you can actually do both on one. Ushmamina b'shamahi, and also that we said, we learned that when you say havdalah, you're going to say the candle first and then the spice. That's in Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of Beis Shammai. If you remember earlier, we had two interpretations of where the two opinions of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were, and Rabbi Yehuda explained that everybody agrees the first bracha is the bracha on the wine. Everybody agrees the last bracha is the bracha on a havdalah, and the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel was which comes first. Beis Shammai says the candle and then the spices, the besamim, and Beis Hillel say no, it's the besamim, the spices first, and the ner, the candle after. However, Ravashi Amar ta'amay pagmay v'kasha bracha tzarich shir chadam milsi. Now, really, these are one idea. The idea of that he couldn't have had made havdalah and just taken a sip, and the idea that the reason he couldn't do that were really two reasons for the same thing. One, because once you taste it, you invalidated the wine that's in there for another bracha because it's now disgusting. It's pagma. You've made it repulsive, no good anymore, as well as you've diminished the minimum amount, because we said that this person had 1 cup of wine. Let's say you just had exactly 3 ounces, and that's the requisite amount. And when you take a sip, now it's less, a little less, a tiny bit less, but it's less, and so it's going to be invalid. So really, not being able to sip from it, we have 2 reasons, but it's really just one teaching, and so that you can't. He couldn't have had a drink from there, either for this reason or for that reason. So he says, really, there's only 7 halachas we're going to learn from here, not 8. What's the reason that it's invalidated when he sipped from it? Because he doesn't have the requisite amount anymore. Tomorrow, we'll continue with some of the halachas of what's necessary for a cup of kiddush and havdalah, and the halachas that come from that. Thank you for joining. Shavua Tov. Wishing you all the best.
Shavua Tov.